Alex Nelson, who graduated 11 years ago from FIT. And when I really at the beginning stages of when I was teaching here, so she was one of my first students, and it's so nice to see her career and how she's grown as an artist. And a year ago, she graduated from the MFA program at Yale University School of Art. And her work is based in the documentary photography tradition, but more recently, she's brought in kind of more conceptual work, including writing and video and photography. So please help me in welcoming Alex Nelson.
Thanks, Jessica, for having me. I thought this was going to be in a classroom, so this feels like a little more scary and official. Better than mine, but figure it out. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and speak with you all. Just to give a little overview of my work from the beginning until now. And can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. And I'm going to speak about my work and life thus far, and also kind of weave in some of the writing that I've been doing that's entered my practice more recently. So yeah, full name is Alexandra Nelson, but no one calls me Alexandra, so just Alex is fine. Still interested in art and animals, never had any athletic ability whatsoever. And as far as the future, I am an artist. I'm a singer as well, but just at karaoke, which is really about charisma and not talent. So this is some early work. I started taking pictures when I was in high school. I grew up in a small town in Maine, and I was lucky enough to have, there's a darkroom at my high school, and my teacher was really encouraging and sort of let me spend my lunch hour in the darkroom printing and kind of messing around. And I just wanted to show a few of these little snaps of these contact sheets because I think that as an artist and as you sort of evolve, you realize that there are certain things that just like keep coming back. So these are some images of my two of my younger brothers. I'm one of five, Trevor and Owen, they're twins. So from early on, I was interested in kind of photographing the familiar, the familial, which I'll get into more momentarily. Also the sort of more surreal, sort of constructed imagery. This is my friend Neely in my mother's wedding dress with a mirror. And this is an early self-portrait. I've always been interested in sort of performance and persona. So I sort of accidentally began this series of images about my family in the wake of my parents' divorce while I was a student here at FIT. And sort of, I would go back home to Maine. I moved here to New York, but found myself kind of drawn back to the place which I left, and was making photographs there, and, you know, in kind of like a more casual documentary sort of way, and then started to do things that were more intentional. Like this image came from a staged reality assignment. These are a series of images of my father. After our parents split up, he moved back to his mother's home, my grandmother's home, and I was sort of interested in like imaging him in this home that was clearly not his own, thinking of him sort of playing this like version of himself. And I was really influenced by photographers like Larry Sultan and Doug Dubois and Tierney Guerin at the time, all of whom have like imaged their family in different ways. And I was just trying to look at how the event of my parents, the dissolution of my parents' marriage had sort of impacted our family dynamics and the individuals in different ways. And wanting to sort of visualize like a passage of time, I ended up photographing them for like 10 plus years. I still photograph them, but in a different way now. And I realized like the sort of like rupture or this like shift in my family life was something that happened while I was away at school. And so it's sort of, I came back home and like everything had shifted, and I felt like there was this sort of like absence in knowing what had really happened there. And I realize now that that absence or lack is often a generative point in my work. So again, this like shift just forced me to sort of observe something that was familiar in a totally different way, and kind of thinking of the camera as this like being the sort of mediator between myself and my family members, so my mother, my father, my 4 younger brothers, and it allowed me to sort of say things that I couldn't say. Again, I was working with like just kind of happened upon images, and then things that were maybe more constructive and intentional. And it's also, I mean, it's something that I started here at FIT, and then kind of continued on after school. And while I was photographing other things during that time, I think that I stuck with this project for a few different reasons. I mean, I was still interested in the subject matter and still felt that like the work was unresolved. But I also, after graduating, started working with artists in their studios, and so I was living here in New York and working full time, and sort of the time that I did have to make pictures was when I like went home for, for Christmas or Thanksgiving or for a few weeks in the summer. So I think it was like about accessibility in a way as well, along with like kind of becoming excited too that there was finally this like visualization of the passing of time, like I had mentioned earlier, particularly I think with Trevor and Owen. You really see how they age over time, and throughout the pictures, going from being like 8 or 9 to then 17. And I didn't really know like how the work was going to resolve itself or end. I thought maybe it would be when Liam, my youngest brother, maybe when he graduated from college or something, or from high school rather, to go to college. But again, I sort of just kept working through this the project. We just didn't really have an ending point. That's a fake baby that my mother and I ended up caring for when it started to cry in the middle of the night. And just like passed out. But it's a useful tool in health classes across the United States, I guess. And I was lucky in that my family they were always like very willing participants in the work. But I also was kind of always tried to be aware of their generosity, and sometimes they would just be like, no, I would like bring the camera up and they'd be like, no, leave me alone, which I respected, particularly as my brothers got a bit older into teenage years, kind of found it more annoying. And then the subjects were always just like myself, my parents, my brothers. Here you can see my father remarries, so this is him with his wife Susan. My brothers at the church where they got married. And I don't know I never published the work, or there was no like finite sort of end point, but I just felt like I was, again, like I said, doing other things alongside this, but it felt like the most sort of constant body of work for me for many years. But it felt kind of, I think with my father's marriage, my mother sort of being really like comfortable in this sort of like independence and moving on in her own way and her part in her life, and it felt like a kind of ending point. And at this point, like I said, I worked for artists for several years after FIT. After I graduated from FIT, I worked with Dan Golden and Susan Meiselis, and I spent a year working at Higher Pictures, which is a great gallery that you should all visit if you haven't. And that felt like a kind of second education for me. And I learned a great deal, but I still, I just didn't feel like I had a lot of time to make my own work and wanted to explore some different things. And I always wanted to go to graduate school, and I just felt there was like a moment where I think I was like I was like 28, 29, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna be 30 soon. I should do the grad school thing. So So anyway, I was thinking about, what I would apply to school with, and, having this like work about my family, but then thinking, I've been doing more sort of traveling and sort of like working with and against this sort of like road trip tradition of photography and being, just wanting to like have a new body of work to present. So I took a short trip out west to Arizona and Nevada to make some work. And this is a point too where I didn't really realize this yet, but like writing was becoming an important part of my practice. And so I'm going to read a bit while I scroll through the images, which they're just like notes from the trip that became more kind of fully formed sentences later on. An hour east off Route 66 is the Ramblin' Rose in Kingman, Arizona, a seedy motel neighboring the ghost town named Valentine. There I want to make pictures at an animal sanctuary called Keepers of the Wild. I drove past it on a road trip years ago, but didn't have time to stop. During this trip, I'm attempting to adopt an alter ego named Alice as a means to take pictures of someone else. She has no doubts, neuroses, or qualms about imaging whatever she wants to. Despite wearing the cowgirl hat, she does not allow me to knock on the doors of strangers' homes like I'd hoped. I have researched Valentine extensively, and it has a sad and interesting history. Only 36 people live there now, but there used to be enough that Bert's Country Dancing could open once a week so the locals could drink and dance on Saturday nights. I have invented a wildly interesting place full of photographic potential in my mind. Oren was born in the back of his parents' car on a highway in Montana. There was a 4-person fatality car accident blocking the way to the hospital. He wasn't breathing when they finally got to the ER. He has 2 quarter-size holes in his heart and a murmur. I was nearly born in the back of a rental car while stuck in gridlock in Manhattan after my parents hit a deer on the Long Island Expressway en route to the hospital. He grew up in Ely, pronounced Ely, Nevada, Harday, and works at a ranch in Baker, where I met him in the bar my friend Nora is working at for the summer. Baker is part of a region known as the Snake Valley on the Nevada-Utah border. At the Border Inn, which is at once a diner, general store, casino, and hotel, you can cross the line in an instant, going back and forth between Pacific and Mountain Time as you please, gaining or losing an hour when you need one. So this was not like, a sort of resolved project, but I feel like I was starting to sort of explore some of the things that I had been interested in, and using that as like a platform to present this work as part of the portfolio that I applied to Yale with. So I got into Yale, and then when I got there, I worked like all summer, like until like it was like the day before I moved to New Haven, and so I thought that I was going to have all this time to make work over the summer before I started, and I came with like nothing. I had no time. So this is a picture of Judy Sill. She's a musician who, I don't know, maybe some of you know. If you don't, she's pretty amazing. There's actually a documentary that's going to be coming out about her. It's been in the works for a while, but it's I think screening like in a few weeks at the SVA Theater nearby. Anyway, that's an aside. But I had this idea. I became like really interested in music, and then started reading about her, and she had lived this like really wild and interesting life, and I had had kind of in the back of my mind like I'd like to try to make work about her, or like figure out some way of sort of like making this like fictitious visual biography. So that's what I just dove into, like right when I got to Yale. I was like, okay, I have nothing. I just have to like rip the Band-Aid off and like start this work. It's just been sort of like percolating for a while. So I started to read and just gather all that I could find like online about her. She didn't have like there's much more, like she's gotten a lot more like attention in recent years. Oh, I should note that she was active in like the 70s in Laurel Canyon, and like died very young and wasn't really recognized for her music during her time as much as I think she should have been. But she's gotten a lot of recognition more recently, which is really cool to see. But at the time, I was just sort of going on like weird blog posts and just like pulling information where I could to learn as much as I could about her, listening to her music. I was also still collecting these photographs from newspaper morgues of Beatles fans from concerts. So you can go to newspaper morgues where they used to house all the prints they would use to go on press with, and you can buy them on eBay, the prints. And so I was really interested in the images where these fans just looked totally distraught, they're so overcome by their love of this music that they're just, they look like they're at church, right? Or in some sort of form of worship. And I show these because I think it's part of my interest in making this work about Judy Sill was my unfulfilled desire to be a musician myself, which I try to live out at karaoke and in other more self-destructive ways. But anyway, so again, I'm going to read a bit of writing and scroll through some of the pictures. Unable to make the Judy pilgrimage I wanted this summer, I looked for her in Connecticut, mostly through printed out articles from the internet and pictures on my studio wall. In the course of my research, I read a story about how Judy picked up a guy in a diner in LA, brought him home, and wrote him Aleister Crowley while they got by. He claims that she turned into a gray serpent on the bed when he ran from her apartment. Now that's a photograph I could make anywhere, a snake on a bed. I searched for snakes on Craigslist and find a bundle, imaged on a table in a basement, entwined. The guy selling them is willing to lend them to me for my picture for a small fee. I'm eager to go to his house and photograph the snakes on a bed or in his basement, but he feels uneasy about this and suggests that we meet at his friend's yard instead. I end up with an image of several snakes on a levitating sheet. The idea for the photograph mirrored the myth I had read about Judy, warped like when you play a game of telephone. So then I finally got to go on my Judy pilgrimage a bit later. In Los Angeles, I set out to Morrison Street in West Hollywood, where Judy died. It turns out that Morrison Street is long and fragmented, and I don't know where to go, so I'd stop for eggs and try to figure it out. The first part of Morrison Street doesn't feel right, so I search on Google Maps Morrison Street apartments and drive to the first address listed. I take a lot of stupid pictures of signs and shrubs and realize I'm wasting my time. As I walk back to my rental car, I see a big black dog on a terrace of one of the candy-colored dingbat apartments. I go to photograph him and get closer to discover a woman in a skin-tight green dress and red lipstick. The dog is called Led Zeppelin. As a 13-year-old, I became obsessed with Led Zeppelin, listened to their entire catalog on repeat for a whole summer, and read Hammer of the Gods. I wanted to be Jimmy Page and be with him simultaneously. This seems to be a recurring theme in my romantic and creative life. Do the Germans have a word for this phenomenon? The woman is named Anne-Marie. I'm so struck by her, I fumble and try to concisely explain that I'm a photographer and I'm on this pilgrimage to find this musician, and she died on the street. She understands. We talk a lot about music and astrology and driving in Los Angeles, and she speaks in this beautiful, airy West Coast lilt. We make lots of pictures. She poses like a Madonna. I take her number, and as I'm walking away, I realize I should have taken a picture of her and Led Zeppelin together. I return the next day to get the picture I missed. She wears the same dress but in lavender, perfectly matching the curtains upstairs. When I get back to New Haven, I scan my film, and in my favorite image of Anne-Marie, there are three shadows on the wall behind her. Judy's, her own, and in the corner of the frame, mine. So I, kind of set out this pilgrimage. I was sort of looking for, kind of like chasing a ghost, or looking, searching for someone that I couldn't find, and finding, looking for this idea of Judy, or this kind of archetype of the people that I met along the way, and all the while I'm keeping all of these notes, and I think that in my writing, I'm really interested in kind of speaking to everything that happens behind the photograph. I feel like I made a lot of really boring pictures on that trip that were really loaded to me, that didn't mean anything to anyone else. And how can you, that's the tricky thing about image making is sometimes it's a really formal thing, and then other times it's there's all of this meaning and interest behind the picture that the picture can't speak to. So the writing is sort of kind of grappling with that. I also kind of started to, that's my fake ID from when I was at FIT that I repurposed. But I started to use archival material in my work, which again was kind of moving away from the way I was working predominantly before, which was just my photographs, and I was just like, this is also, I think, at the start of COVID, I started doing this. So just kind of thinking about like other ways to make images other than just like being out in the world and making images. Again, thinking about persona and the sort of like performance. So this was my kind of primary focus in grad school, but I realized it got less and less about the specificity of Judy Still and her story as the work kind of went on, and I think I realized that I was like ultimately interested in, as I mentioned earlier, like this idea of absence as being a point of inspiration or a generative point. And so with Judy, that was like the lack of information that I kind of could glean about her, and this like place where I could project onto. And I think that that's again, a recurring theme in my work. This is my little crazy detective room that I made in my friend's closet in New Haven. They let me camp out there for a few days. So I'm going to read through another story about sort of absence and coincidence. My mother is one of 12, 8 girls and 4 boys, an Irish Catholic family from Belport on the south shore of Long Island. After dinner, all the siblings would be assigned chores: clear, wash, dry, and put babies. The girls would usually be assigned the babies. The boys slept in a finished basement while the girls shared bunk beds upstairs. Their next door neighbor, William Higginbotham, was a physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project. His son was an amateur photographer. Fireworks by Grucci is known as America's first family of fireworks, headquartered in a residential neighborhood in the village of Belport. In the 1950s, Fireworks by Grucci simulated a mini atomic bomb for a staged civil defense alert contracted by the Defense Department. In the small Long Island town, frantic dogs barked, a man had a heart attack, women fainted, and a chandelier fell from the living room ceiling. The day after aired on ABC, November 20th, 1983, 100 million people in 39 million households viewed this made-for-TV movie during its initial broadcast. The film posits a war between NATO forces and the Warsaw Pact that turns into a full-scale nuclear exchange, the US and the Soviet Union launching multiple missiles in unison. It follows the aftermath through the residents of the small city of Lawrence, Kansas, and the family farms that surround the missile silos. On November 26, 1983, the Grucci factory exploded, killing 2 people and injuring 24. 50 homes near the blast site were left uninhabitable. A mushroom cloud formed over Belport. People ran from their houses half naked, throwing children out of windows, thinking it was the end. The blast created an implosion, a suction effect that blew the windows of neighborhood buildings outward rather than inward. CBS News called the Beach family home after the explosion, looking to speak to my grandfather. He was the building inspector for the village of Belport. He was out, so my Aunt Maureen took the call on the phone that the children were normally forbidden to answer and gave an interview. 3,000 miles away, my Uncle Tom drove his pickup truck along the California coast and pulled over when he heard his sister's voice on the radio. Many years later, I am driving in California, not on the coast, but from LAX to Elysian Heights in a rental car. After attempting to visualize the story about fireworks, disaster, and nuclear family through photographing abandoned buildings and glass in West Haven, I've sort of given up. I go out west again, where imaging is easier. Despite the news of COVID-19 cases rising in the US, I decided to go forward with this trip as I planned. Los Angeles, Yucca Valley, Vegas. I have a tiny bottle of hand sanitizer, the vanilla bean scented one from Bath & Body Works that smells like 5th grade. Casey gave it to me when I was in New York. There was none to be found in the stores. As usual, I have waited too long to take care of something urgent. I worry that despite slathering this vanilla bean antiseptic all over my seatbelt and the tray table and the plane and the steering wheel and the door handles of this rental car, that I've contracted and am carrying this deadly invisible virus when I walk into Jane's house. She is unconcerned. Bartholomew is more convinced of what is about to unfold than the 2 of us. Los Angeles is unusually rainy for the next several days. On the one sunny day, I go to the Bronson Caves and photograph the different mouths of the abyss, and then to the Hollywood Cemetery in search of famous ghosts. One afternoon in the guest room at Jane's, I realize I cannot continue this trip and need to fly back east as soon as possible. I canceled my rental house in the desert and the motel in Vegas. This trip could not all be for nothing, so I decided to make a day trip to Yucca Valley. On the drive out of Los Angeles, each electric sign flashes warnings about COVID, and I pass a burnt-out car and another that's mounted to the guardrail. I'm supposed to meet up with 2 musicians that live in the desert that Colby's put me in touch with, but we can't meet until the afternoon. I wander around and try to take some photographs, but I've forgotten how to use my camera and overexpose the cowboys parading through the facade of the Old West. Killing time in Pioneer Town, I go to Pappy and Harry's, but as soon as I open the door and realize it is full of people, I slowly back out. I eat grilled cheese and have a Diet Coke in a less populated diner in Yucca Valley that has lots of framed photographs of kittens on the wall. I drive to Landers and meet with the musicians, but I feel too nervous to make any decent images. Just a few of their homestead in the desert and a big white fluffy dog. I don't linger long and I start my drive back to LA. Over the dirt roads, I realize that the place that I left a little over a week ago will not resemble the one that I will return to. A small church in Landers has a big neon Jesus sign on the roof, illuminating the sand below. He's certainly not here, not anywhere. Back home in New Haven, I take the road trip that might have been on my computer via Google Street View. Clicking my way through the desert, the faux car lurching with every touch of the arrow in the center of the highway, I stop at a rest stop off the Barstow Freeway. And upon looking around, I happen upon a figure in the desert, briskly walking past a rock, 3 kids atop some dirt piles behind her. I found myself in the California desert. This figure looks exactly like me, and this scene an image I would have taken in a parallel universe in which the pandemic did not happen, and I continued my journey east. So yeah, it's a long, meandering story, but I think the points of connection for me are this, like, again, this idea of like coincidence about foreboding disaster, that I was like making this work about my mother's memory of this event that coincided with this film airing, and then I go out to help, like, making this while then we have our own sort of disaster happening. And again, becoming interested in using images that are not my own. So like this one, the Google Street View, I actually got to go to this rock last summer. It was very exciting. And make this picture, or some version of it. And then also like working with these double exposures of film stills. This is an image of some circles that I drew on the carpet of my mom's attic. My brothers, so didn't totally stop photographing my family, but just like interested in kind of using them as like surrogates or actors, maybe, instead of trying to image them as themselves. I'm interested here in this like duality of gestures, or the duality that can happen in images, or it looks like it could be like a tender embrace or something maybe more violent. All right, so now I'm like approaching the end of grad school, which was, we moved online after that trip that I was recounting in that story. I like come back to New Haven, everything's shut down, we go online. So then I become like really kind of confined to making work in Connecticut, which was actually sort of a blessing, because I think my work has often been sort of destination-based in a way, in which I feel like I have to get outside of the place where I live and spend most of my time to make work, to see something differently. And I really was forced to just work with like within my immediate surroundings for the most part, where I can get to with my car. So I had noticed this mountain on the side of the road outside of Waterbury, Connecticut, and initially I just wanted to photograph some of the tags that were on the mountain. And then when I got all the images back, I was using this like crazy zoom lens on a digital camera, and then I got all the images back, and I thought it was more interesting to sort of make this kind of like Frankenstein version of the thing that I had been imaging. And I was thinking about, this was for my thesis. I mean, I think this before the thesis show, but it kind of came to represent what I was like speaking to earlier, kind of about like storytelling, the multiple tellings of a tale, thinking about objective and subjective, truth and myth. And it sort of, I don't know, became this like representation of my practice over the last few years. I'm trying to put together these stories about Judy Sill or about my family, or the way that I was working was like this big melding, so it felt kind of significant. So I had that piece, which was like one part of the installation for my thesis. And then the image in the street view image in the desert, a video piece, and then a few images. It's really weird to have to, which I'm sure some of your freshmen see got a ways to go, but it's hard to try to put a nice like little bow on all the work that you do for 4 years or for 2 years or 3 years or whatever. It's like, yeah, difficult. And I was interested in like, I feel like I got to this point where I was like working with still images, working with video, working with writing. I didn't really want to to show something that felt completely, perfect and sort of wrapped up. So like a few weeks before thesis, I decided to make a video piece. I made one other before that with a friend of mine as a collaborative effort, but I wanted to do something on my own. And these are the lyrics. The title of the video piece is called Blues on the Ceiling, Blues on My Ceiling. And I've been listening to Karen Dalton's cover of Fred Neil's song, Blues on the Ceiling. And I was thinking about cover songs and how, like, you just have to change, how, like, the subtlest changes can sort of completely, I think, shift the meaning of the song and make it, the person who's covering the song, make it their own. And so, in this video piece, the two versions of the song play, and then there's also this, so it's just some audio, and there's no dialogue or anything, but there's a text that runs throughout, and the text is from a Samuel Beckett play called Rockabye, and the first stanza is his intact, sort of unedited, and then there's a second stanza that I sort of edited ever so slightly, the way that Karen Dalton has edited the Fred Neil song. Yeah, I was interested in like conveying this sort of emotional and like geographical sort of movement. Again, returning to the mountain to film, the one that I had photographed and made this sort of collage of. So using that as a space to make all this work. And that's me here in my red Volvo 240 sedan that I purchased at the beginning of grad school, which felt like maybe an impractical decision, but it turned out to be really useful. Here it is in my thesis work. So, and it's still running. I still have it. So, yeah. So these are just some stills. I could play the video, but it sometimes gets difficult to do on these things. But yeah, I was thinking about the camera as this tool of like both recognition and also distance. And then sort of like me as this lone female protagonist that I feel like kept kind of coming back into my work in various forms, like Judy Silk, for example. Yeah, it was, I feel like video for me felt like this kind of interesting merging of the things that I was sort of grappling with, which like being kind of frustrated with images, being interested in writing, and that it felt like a kind of happy medium. So. And then our thesis show traveled to a few different venues. We got to have a show out in San Francisco at Casemore Kirkby, which is a great photo gallery out there if you ever are in that part of the country, or just taking a look online at what they're doing. And so I showed the film, but just in a different way. I printed out these little stills and pinned them to the wall with napkins. So I was interested in like showing showing some of the same images, but then also like doing these different kind of presentations instead of again just like having the kind of having it just move from one space to the next in the same way. Then I also got to do a show titled Sacrificed Pavement at a gallery called G15, which is not my partner. At the time he was just my friend and classmate, but he started a gallery in his studio. So he would empty out his studio and then host these like 2 or 3 day shows, which basically only Yale students could see because everything was very, locked down because of the pandemic. But we did this summer in like June, so I finished up in May and had done the thesis show and everything, and it was just like really kind of exciting way of bringing together work from that I'd done in grad school and some images that I made before grad school, and like kind of abandoning this idea of like having these strict parameters and like projects that I'd done and like mixing everything together. And we painted the floor red, which turns out you're not supposed to do that. We got an email, kind of an angry email from our like building supervisor, and we painted it. It's fine, it's gray now, but it was really fun to have it be red for a minute. And I feel like red is kind of a color that like kept coming back and grew back into my work. I think you can see that also in the thesis work. Sort of being interested in that color because of its representation of like the sort of the extremes in human experience and emotion. So desire, foreboding, love, loss, etc. There are the girls again. I need those girls. Yeah, so it was a really kind of exciting way to like close out my grad school experience. Was with these like 2 different shows, but yeah, felt this felt kind of like a more exciting representation of my work actually than what I had done in the thesis show in some ways. And then I also put together a little book of my writing called Liner Notes. And I collaborated with a designer, Louisa Dale. She has a press called QuickBooks, and the idea is that they're literally quick books. So some of them are just like one sheet, like a Riso, just like one sheet of paper, images on one side, text on the other. At Yale, you have to weave a portfolio of your work at the library, and you can pull out anyone's portfolio. If you ever go to the Haas Library at Yale, you can look at anyone's work from like the 70s until last year. I saw Jessica's portfolio while I was there, which was fun. And usually they all have like images, prints, and then a statement of some kind. And I just like didn't want to leave something that was just like, my photographs are about blah, this, whatever. And so I was excited by like this writing class I had taken, that we got to take with Rudy, and I had been kind of formulating, like I said, like all these notes from all these trips that I had done over the past few years, and put that into something kind of coherent in liner notes, along with some little kind of snippets of images. And again, like I said before, sort of interested in the idea of like text functioning as this way of like grappling with all the things that images kind of can't do. Or a lot of the writing is about that sort of frustration. This is just a picture of my studio. I was able to do a residency in June at a place called the Ellis Beauregard Foundation in Rockland, Maine. I grew up in Maine, but I'd never been to Rockland, so it was exciting to be in a different part of the state. And it was just like, there were no expectations. It was just like, here's a studio space, here's a little bed in a corner to sleep in. The studios were in an old school building, so got amazing light. And it was just a really good time to like sort of sit and scan and print some of the images that I made post-grad school that had really just been like sitting in my desk for the last, like 9 months or something, kind of untouched. After grad school, I did a bit of traveling, and I knew I was going to come back to New York eventually, but I was sort of delaying that as much as possible. And I ended up going out to Nevada, the place where I had made images before grad school, this place Baker. And my friend Nora had introduced me to these really amazing people, Kate and Jake, who opened a restaurant and motel out there in the middle of nowhere. And they unfortunately sold the business, but they were in the midst of closing out and they just needed help. So I had seen them earlier in the summer, and they were like, if you're ever interested in coming out and working here and helping us out, let us know. And I was like, yeah, definitely, sign me up. I don't, feel any sort of rush to get back to reality. So they flew me out, and I worked there for like 2 weeks and sort of treated that as a residency as well. I would work during the day, like putting the garden to bed or, helping out in the motel office, and then photographing in the mornings and the evenings. And yeah, it was like this time I was like, I love photographing this area, but I was like trying to figure out kind of why, because I'm not particularly interested in making this like sort of documentary study of this place, Baker, Nevada. But I'm interested in like what the place sort of represents and how it can become maybe a stage for things that I'm interested in exploring, and how it's a sort of like no place, in between place. And while I was out there, I was like, always have my camera on me. Katie asked me to get ice cream in Ely, which is the town over. It's a very remote area, so like Ely is an hour away through a mountain pass, and that's like the only place where you can go to like a proper grocery store. And so I had to pick up ice cream for them in Ely, and I got their truck, and I was like, I'm not gonna bring my camera, like whatever, I'll have ice to get the ice cream and turn around. And I was waiting for this Cisco truck driver to call me to be like, I have the ice cream. And so I was sitting in this Love's parking lot, and of course, like the most incredible scene of all of these like teenagers who were walking from this their high school right here to the Love's for lunch happened. And it was just like so beautiful. The light was streaming in, there was like dust everywhere, and I just like, my soul left my body, and I just like cried. I was like, how could I not have my camera right now? This is insane. And my nose was bleeding, it was so dry out there, I was getting nosebleeds all the time. Yeah, that's all to say, like, it's another story for another photograph not taken, another story for the book, but something I'd hope to get back to. This is my little crappy iPhone picture of that moment, but yeah, I'm hoping to get out there again at some point soon and sort of restage this moment that I missed. But I know I was interested in this like idea of them sort of passing through this like portal or something from one world to another over this little, dusty patch of land in outside of the Love's gas station. So yeah, that's it. That's what I'm dreaming of at the moment, is this place. So I'll hopefully get back soon. Thanks for listening to me ramble. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, you can shout them out.
We don't have microphones. They don't have to shout.
Oh, you have mics?
Any questions for anyone?
Yeah, one right there, yeah. Sorry? It was a real learning experience. Yeah, it really was. I got to work with her archive, and she hired me like 2 weeks before I graduated from FIT, so that was helpful. Yeah, like I said, it was like a second, working with her and with Susan was like a second education. So like I had my undergrad, then I had the time in between with no degree, and then I went and got my MFA. But yeah, it's interesting to see how someone's studio works and like putting together exhibitions and just seeing like behind the scenes like how it's really difficult to like, even when you're like a really successful artist, like just to maintain a practice, and there's always other things that sort of that you have to deal with, and yeah, it's like important, I think, and humbling to see that because committing to like a creative life is not an easy one. So
I was curious, like, photographs are something where you sort of see the whole thing all at once, and text is something where it's sort of spooling out in front of you, like, as you go. And you also, like, in text you have much more control, and in photographs, the control that you have is sort of, like, feels a little bit more hidden. And so I was curious for you, with, like, making text and images sort of in the same place, or, like, of the same moment, what do you think it is that they're sort of doing differently, or what draws you to one or the other?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I do think of them, I guess except for like the video felt like the first sort of like merging of the two in a way, even though the text that I was using was like this appropriated text of Daniel Beckett's. Because I do think of them as sort of separate entities. Like I don't know if I'm necessarily interested in like making a book where there's like photographs and text, and like they serve these kind of different functions for me, I think. Where like the text, yeah, again, not existing to complement the photograph, but like for me to dissect it in like a different kind of way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of them as, yeah, I mean, maybe someday I'll kind of integrate them more, but yeah, it's not something that I can like imagine having, like, not think like the magic of both is like lost if they would be like right next to each other, you know? So yeah, I'm still like, I'm struggling to figure out how to blend those interests, I think, but for now they're kind of remaining separate, yeah. Except video feels like a good solution at the moment, but I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll continue using video as a medium in the future because of that reason, and like as like a primary, as your primary medium rather than photography, or?
I think I'll always make pictures. I think I'll always make pictures. But yeah, I definitely want to do more video work, and I've been shooting a bit recently. Not with like any kind of grander idea, but just my friend Nabil, who I collaborated with on a video. It was like the most fun I had in grad school making something. Because we like wrote and shot and like built a set in like 10 days right before credit. It was so much fun. But he and I have been having a sort of exchange where we've been sending videos back and forth to one another, and kind of as these like letters, which I think will eventually amount to something. But yeah, I'm really, even like this, I feel like I kind of can see more as like a video audio piece, rather than stills. If I was to go out and, you know, cast people or like try to recreate this scene, I think I would want it to be in motion. So I think it's like, but then there's a project that I have in mind at the moment that I see very much as like something that exists as just still images. So it's really like, I think, different works and different bodies of work call for different things, but I really would like to do more with video for sure. Yeah, Matt?
So it seems like for two of the larger projects that you embarked on, one being the one regarding your family and the other with Judy Silk. Right?
SIL, S-I-L-L,
SIL.
yeah.
So with both of them, it seems like your interest starts off with the reality of them as a person, like with your family, if you're interested in the dynamic and things like that. With SIL, it's sort of off of her life, and then as you start to do it, it starts to drift a little bit more into a fiction about their life and exploring like different ways of using photography to maybe not be purely documentary. You're talking about with your family, you're using your brother's stage stuff and moving away from that pure documentation. So I'm curious how you see the role of fiction in photography, specifically in the documentary practice.
It's a really good question and good observation. I mean, I think the idea of like the purely sort of like truthful, objective image is something that sort of dissolves more and more. I mean, even with people who are working in like a real like photojournalistic kind of way, like the photographer is always making a decision, like a formal one, which then impacts like the reality that it's putting out, or reality with what it's putting out into the world. But I think like working with something that's sort of within the real or within the documentary, but then like the way that sort of fiction sort of like creeps in from the sides. Like I'm interested in that, like friction of like, you know, I think that the medium is just like inherently like about those two things always of like, it's like we're dealing with, you know, as photographers, you're like dealing with the real world in some capacity, right? No matter like how, even if you're working in the studio and completely like crafting and staging something entirely, and having sort of like sample. I was talking to Ian about this recently, and he was writing something about like how it's like using like in music, it's like using a sample. It's like we're kind of like sampling the world as photographers, I think. And yeah, I just think there's always like, it's really hard to, I think, like think of anything as like really sort of objective, like documentary sort of truth. But it exists, so it's like I just am really fascinated where like, yeah, again, the two things sort of meet Um, does that
Yeah.
cover it? We can talk more about that later. It's like my favorite thing to talk about. Hi.
Hi. Oh, geez, that's loud. Okay.
I know this is too.
So specifically with the work that you were talking about earlier with your family, like starting with your parents' divorce, you mentioned that there was no real end to it, but now you're shooting them within a different context. Do you feel now that they're like specifically two different projects, or that one kind of evolved into the other?
I think that the work that I made about them, like through like undergrad, like while I was here, I feel like that's its own thing. Again, I think, yeah, I like the idea, like I said, with the show that I put together with the Red Floor. It was like a nice like merging of like a bunch of different things and stripping away the sort of like boundaries that sometimes we just like have to for like, you know, because it's like functional or helpful for us to put these like parameters around what we're doing. But yeah, I do think like the images, like, I don't know, it could kind of go either way. Like a picture of like my two brothers wrestling on the red floor could easily be like put into all the other images that I've made of them throughout the years. But I think like in my mind I was thinking of that existing with the mountain picture. You know, like that it was like kind of in this other sphere. But I think there could be this like, or like the idea of there being like a lot of back and forth and like melding of all the work together.
Got it, thanks.
Thanks for your question. Anyone else?
How did your experience with school shape or influence your work?
At FIT or Yale or both?
I would say both, yeah.
Yeah, they're huge. I mean, yeah, like hugely influential experiences, very different experiences. I mean, when I came here, yeah, like I said, like I moved from Maine. I was like really excited to just like get out of this little town and move to the city, and I loved like being able to like walk to the galleries and see like in Chelsea and just like see art all the time, and that was like hugely influential. It was like thinking about like location, and then having professors here who like really like nurtured like what I was doing. Jessica was also making some work about her family at the same time that I had started my project, and I was helping her with her archive of it, and that became like a really meaningful experience of like sharing and support. I think there's like, I don't know how, I mean, I'm sure things are different now, but when I was here, it was like, there was a lot of really technical instruction, which is so important and helpful because it's like, you have to be, like, you have to have all the tools to then know what you want to do with the tools. Yeah, I was like, kind of, I was sort of where I was like, oh, okay, like, when are we going to get to like the other stuff? But it was like end of sophomore year, junior year, I felt like beginning of the year, I felt like I found a rhythm, and again, yeah, there was some professors who were still here, like Jessica still being here, and Allison, and Brad and Brian. Like it was like, it's really, they were all really, I think, yeah, like interested in shaping the program and helping us realize our visions beyond just like, again, the kind of technical instruction, which is super important, but like, yeah, it's like a means to an end. So yeah. It was like people being here, like being in New York was, yeah, hugely important, even though I didn't make work here, but like having access to all, you know, to things, to like every museum and gallery, and yeah, that was really important to me too. And then going to Yale, I had such an amazing cohort of people that I studied with. There's like 10 people in each class, and I just got really lucky that mine was like a very close-knit one. And that was important at the beginning, but then even more important when we went online during COVID, and it was like just us, like our teachers weren't like, no, you know, everything was online, and it was like just us and supporting each other. And so that doesn't always happen, but I think for me, yeah, just having that community, and like we were just, yeah, living all like on the same block basically in New Haven, and we're like constantly talking about work and going into each other's studios, and sometimes people are like, oh, it's so, like, it sucks you went to grad school and the pandemic happened, but like, I'm like, yeah, there were parts about that sucked, but I wouldn't change anything because I was like, I really value the relationships that I have with all of the people that I met there in my program and also like outside of it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
You mentioned you worked for some studios for a while at the beginning. Is your photography any portion of your income? And if not, like photography, if not, you prefer it that way to keep it like separate?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, the studios, when I said like artist studios, I meant like working with Nan and with Susan in their studios. And yeah, I haven't really done a lot of editorial work. I shot something recently for the New Yorker, which was super fun. I just like got a call to go photograph at Dia Beacon, which was like really fun. And I just like, yeah, I started working for artists when I was in school. I did like a bunch of internships when I was here, which like was really helpful to kind of figure out what I did and did not like in terms of like, you know, a day job, because most people have to have a day job and there aren't, unless you're lucky and you have a trust fund, which I don't. And so when I was in school, I started working with like Jessica, and I was working with Gail Albert-Helleman for a little bit over the summer. I was like, oh, I really like working with other artists. And so that just became, I kind of like fell into that, and like that became my, you know, my way of, you know, surviving and paying my bills. But it was also fulfilling. And I think that doing sort of like photographing for like money, like doing editorial work or even doing like weddings or headshots or any of that, like the editorial thing is like a lot big, and a lot of people do it. It just seems like to me seems like so much work to have to find the work, and like that constant hustle, I think can be really, really stressful and really time consuming. So I never really like went down that route. I just sort of like the idea of keeping it like precious or something, where it's like I don't want to start to like dislike the thing that I actually really like doing. So for me, that kind of separation has always worked. But although like if I got called to do some interesting assignment, I would like totally do it. But I never thought of that as like a stable way of making a living, and also like I kind of valued the separation. I mean, it's interesting in like the art world, you like. Photography is still like not valued the way that like painting and like sculpture and everything else is, and I think because of its history as like being like a trade, it's like a tool, right? Which like is so irritating to me, and it's like irritating. It's like, how are we still having this conversation? But yeah, it's just a side note about that, about like having the thing that you make your art with also be the thing that kind of makes you money. If you're lucky, your art makes you some money. I don't know. It's hard to figure out, but it's good to, I think, do some of that experimentation while you're in school if you can, swing it to do like internships and things to just kind of check off like, I don't want to do that, or I do want to do that. So yeah, I hope that answers. Are you from Maine too?